Uh, so where do we go? It's more like I think in a way this Freemasonry where they privately go, well, you think you know what you know from what people have told you about the Bible, but we know that Jesus was a martyr and not a savior, and so they're on this perennial inquisition into the citizenry of the ACT to go, well, this person is a martyr, surely. Let's martyr his cause. And interestingly, as men to work for, it's you'd be handing prescriptions that patients would hand to you, and they would look. It's like they would pause and look at each third or fourth script, wondering, oh, could this be a forged script? Like, are we getting played? Is the pharmacy getting fucking played and ripped off? Is this a forged script? And now, what I realize they have not come to terms with in their religion is that, yeah, uh, if you understand what 2 centuries of scholarship has turned up, that Mark's gospel is the only approximate uh, acquisition of what who Jesus was about as a conversational matter and what he stood for, and the most you will get is from Marx, but even it's not that it's the best. We're not calling it uh, the best coverage of Jesus being out there. We're calling it the least fucked up one, and the least fucked with. It's still written 37 years after his execution. So there was a tremendous oral tradition going on for some decades, where he was obviously the topic of conversation amongst a lot of people after being put to death, and they put the Gospel of Mark together. But then there's clear evidence of a religious big fish story being built out of Mark's Gospel into Luke and Matthew's Gospel and John's Gospel. And so these Freemasons are coming at Christianity going, no, he's not a savior, he's a martyr. They're holding the same evidence against him, which is it's not even evidence once you comprehend the reality of what forgery is and interpolation is in terms of how manuscripts were written in the first century Roman Empire. Then you don't agree that someone deserves to be put to death because of words that someone put in their mouth 40 years after their death. So they put themselves in this absurd chair of grandstanding judgment over Christendom, which really Freemasonry is not the solution to Christianity. It's Freemasonry is yet to come to terms with many problems of its own, and I think that they are conversational cowards because they're not bringing forward their I know better than yous to enter into debates or to sit on Q&A in a chair and then debate about what the Freemason Church has to stand for. You learn it has some sort of hierarchical structure where you start based on how much heart you've got is an indicator of how far you might go to reach to the top. And they remind you of Tom Cruise Scientology. You're going to get to the top just to get taught. You're secretly still in a jar, and the world is an illusion based on the light refraction in the water of a formaldehyde jar, and you're an alien fetus, and everything's fake like the Matrix. Like, who fucking. I think a church that doesn't care to freely come forward and say what it stands for and why and how and why it reached its convictions and tries to entice you with some pyramid scheme, they're the ones that I think already lost. L. Ron Hubbard said, he failed to sell science fiction books, so he made the Church of Scientology and thought, well, and he even said, if you will not get rich. If you want to get rich, you will not get rich writing science fiction books. If you want to get rich, start a religion. And yeah, he said that. And so this big dick contest between the Freemasons at the Christians, and the Christians hardly even know about it, really, because Freemasons want to be secretive yet ideologically grandstanding as well at the same time. And I think that stems from in the back of their mind, they've got Lucifer fucking with God. It's male on male, hot action. Yet I'm a major homo because I like cosmetics. While they're praying to and worshipping one supernatural male's endless tango with another supernatural male. These Freemason poofters and who they think that the nerve, the hypocritical nerve for them to think that they know more than cops, like private investigative, private eye, very highly trained and very honed skilled cops, the courts, judges, psychologists, psychiatrists, and all these professions that are in place so that we can work towards having the just city in principle. And Freemasonry, I think, poses a threat to us working towards that, because they take for granted that they know better than various people in various professional roles, simply because they think they're secretly in the winning religion. Now it's beyond the scope of religious discrimination. It's a level of invasion of and usurpation of the basic rights, privacy, health, life, movement, expression, that we all too equally have. And Freemasons like Gary and Roger are encroaching against those rights, just so they can try and calculate ways to, boost sales for the sort of drugs that if they were to dispense more of that kind of drug, then they can raise more buildings in more suburbs in Canberra. And that's not the way to approach the pharmacist's code of ethics concerning placing the health needs of the patient as the first consideration. The first tenet of the pharmacist's code of ethics has been a direct contradiction to the slogan and marketing statement of capital chemists that everybody needs their capital chemist. It can be construed to be an intimidating move against the suffering, going, well, you're suffering, don't you know you fucking need us? You peasants, you underprivileged, non-Freemason peasants, don't you know you need us? I'd go somewhere else. I worked for Capital Chemist 9 years. Any other pharmacy franchise in Canberra has more dignity and integrity. But that's, and they're not doing the damage that Gary Cairns and Roger Tall have done. So that's my recommendation. So I'm responding the next day to about a 50+ minute speech excerpt and preview on what content I'm covering in my upcoming book. And this year I felt some phenomenologies intertwine where I've had epiphanies despite being in all I wanted at the time was answers to resolve suffering so I could move forward. And instead, a lot of avenues where I'd wandered in the past began to intertwine, and I was left thinking, wow, maybe the opposition to theodicy is and theocracy is because it is really a greater insult to our people's intelligence for them not to have that. than to have, or to at least know what options they do have. I'm going to be talking about how, and this was the biggest challenge to me as a writer, is, well, you're a philosopher, you love philosophy, atheism is not a philosophy, and you're writing as an atheist, so you're not trying to gain recruits, you're not trying to say these bunch of readers are my people, these are my teachings to them. I'm not trying to say anything along any of those lines. But what I did spend a lot of time thinking about and fascinated on was a question throughout my years working in pharmacy, where the two owners of these chemists were adamant that I was either a fag or coming to terms with knowing how to become a fag, and I ended up spinning it back on them in the form of a question and saying, well, hang on, you're Freemasons, you don't completely conceal it from your line of work, but you admit it to a certain point. You've got, in your theology, you've got your nominated patron saint Lucifer fighting and outsmarting and defeating the biblical God Jehovah. Now, you say that, these gay males that you're yet to help realize themselves have some inner struggle on a sexual level that they're not realizing, that they've got to realize and feel their way through and come and discover themselves as gay, and then owe Gary Cans and Roger Tor their credit for helping them discover who they really are, when really nothing, no degrees in psychology, no degrees in psychological counseling, no degrees in psychiatry, no degrees in neurology, no degrees in the human sciences, no degrees in social sciences, just Freemasonry. And what I'm asking you to now imagine are years or even centuries of a festering, seething enviousness on their behalf, and the behalf of their biggest representatives, not to be under-acknowledged in a sense. We've recluded because they're not uninvolved in this battle amongst the theologians to say, well, which church has the one religion worked out. And the stereotype that, well, every one of them probably thinks that they're in their religion, that's got it all worked out. Freemasonry's no exception. They're just essentially saying they've got X amount of sand in their vagina, to the point that they are not men in an academic sense, where they won't bring forth representatives to try and debate and argue for the tenets and the integrity of Freemasonry theology in public forums or in debates. They won't contest the four horsemen of atheism. They won't put their mouth where the money is, basically. And so I would read over the years about this. Bisexuals are more prone to to nervous breakdowns, to depression, to this, to that, to that, to that. And then I would look on the other hand and go, well, how many people in healthcare are compelled to become healthcare officers of one kind or another because of the theological stories of one form of religious faith or another? And probably here in the capital of Australia, swaying more toward the Christendom, which is, I put it to you, if you're a Christian, you've got all this boogie nigger shit built up about Jesus having to die because a woman ate an apple in the garden. But put your money where you're running your cunt mouth and just talk about it now. Wasn't that a sexist story? I mean, did you read much about the rights of women progressively throughout the Old Testament manuscripts in the Old Testament of the Bible? No. You read that the woman wouldn't have even been fucking invented unless Adam got lonely and was tired of masturbating over palm leaves. She owes her whole existence to the first man's complaint to his male god. Women's rights are not going to be found in the Bible. And, if there's a proportionate relationship to the suffering, unjust suffering being inflicted on the bisexual rights movement, and that it corresponds to the advancing of the agenda of the religious right, then I'm happy to step in and say, well, let's debate this, because even your term supernatural sounds like an oxymoron. You know, my microwave in this shitty little apartment would have been supernatural to one of the early Aboriginal slaveholders to first settle on this nation. If I showed him my microwave and said, look, leave the abo alone, look at this microwave. I can melt some noodles in a bowl over a 5-minute period. And, you know, and he'd have called that supernatural. The whole concept meant beyond what is known to nature. But as soon as, and that's what the scientific march is as soon as something is quantified by science or measured in some way, it's not part of a supernature anymore. It becomes part of what we know about. That's why I think there's more dignity in these, in the cautionary nature of these pre-Copernican theologians that thought if you were to walk so far, you might walk off the edge of the earth and then fall down and fall endlessly. They hadn't done what Copernicus did. They hadn't mapped a spheroid world. They hadn't worked out they were on a sphere. They thought heaven was above and hell was down below. And, you know, who has more integrity and dignity in the year 2019? Those guys back then that had no Copernicus, without putting all that effort that he put into that voyage to prove that Earth was something round, or people now with a global satellite network going, well, fuck, I hope God still beams me up to heaven when I'm dead. And, you know, they'll probably even be borrowing terms from Star Wars and Star Trek and going, I do hope he truly does beam me to the local, to the nearest heaven, you know, the nearest heaven beacon, trans fucking whatever. So, yeah, the question of what's necessary for a global civilization is a challenging one, and it may be an impossible one, but one thing to step back and realize as well is that, and recognize, is that when Charles Darwin was writing, and when he, in states of misery, declared himself agnostic and to have lost faith in the Christian promises after his daughter Annie had died, he would actually get teary-eyed while trying to start and study the amount of suffering that went on just within the animal kingdom, just between the predatorial tiger having at the possum climbing the tree, and think like, how could a God wanting good for everyone want to create this strange machine? Like, and you know, we're obviously still questioning, but what I hate, and I think Freemasonry have represented themselves a danger in this regard for not having the guts to bring their apologists forward to enter debate, is that they're retaining all the confidence that comes with being recluse cunts over years, while taking no responsibility to defend their philosophy against even the most rudimentary forms of cross-examination. And that's two good reasons I suggest and submit to you that Roger Tall and Gary Cairns are the two cowards that built Capital Chemists, and they should answer for that too. Thank you. So, I did come to harbor progressive resent toward Gary and Roger, because I think that on a rights basis, there are certain lines of conversation that you invite a person to, particularly if they're the subject of the conversation. You invite them into it, you ask them questions, you wait for their answers, and you make sure that as it's a conversation about them, pertaining to them, that they are at least done the basic, the civil acknowledgement of being allowed to be in a conversation about them, while they're at least made to physically stand there in the same conversation. Now, when it comes to them and what I learned about this whole martyring thing, I was left with a sense initially that they were able to identify religious wackos in the community, and they had some sort of qualification that enabled them to spot people who were trying to, they had I think it's what Sam Harris means by the term hermeneutically sealed worldviews, which is a worldview where no matter what could be asked of you or said to you, there's no possible way that you would ever change your mind. You've got it all figured out, yet nothing that could ever be said or asked of you will ever compel you towards mediating your own view or changing your own mind about anything. And so I was left with the impression that as part of after certain many years of success within Capital Chemists, they were appointed some great privilege in association with policing or the army to spot who those sort of religious idealists were in Canberra's community who are out conscripting, like making disciples, for instance, or saying, you've got to follow these beliefs and teachings, and to essentially put those people into psych wards. Now, instead what I learnt was that Roger and Gary are two men who think that why be a psychologist or a psychiatrist when you're already a Freemason? It teaches you more than you ever need to know about those pathetic. You're above both those professions. Why bother be concerned with a petty thing like due process of police or the magistrate's court? You're above both of them. You're Freemasons, and instead they're motivated to. And I turned around and made them readdress a certain point, which is something that as a naturalist, it's not very hard to work out. But they themselves they're worse than fundamentalist Christians in a way, because at least when you talk amongst fundamentalist Christians, they'll go, well, yeah, I'm open to the view that the gospel that says the least about Jesus was the one written first. It made no mention of a resurrection. That's the gospel of Mark. The gospels of Matthew and Luke were caked on another 10 to 15 years later by people already in possession of the gospel of Mark. And the John's Gospel, in which it sounds like Jesus is written up as like Tom Cruise sent out, dispatched in Mission Impossible, that all who believe in him shall not perish but have eternal life, is this Johannine 95 AD. So in a sense, then you read back in it and it looks like, well, you may have atrociously grabbed, verbally, unjustly accosted a foreigner and charged him with some sort of seditious political activity, and then suicided him and then crucified him, and he wasn't even seditious. You'll notice they introduce, at the same time that they try to introduce all of these potentially seditious teachings that are supposed to make you go, oh, well, now I can at least imagine why they would have wanted to crucify him back at that point in time. That comes in the same Gospels as they say that, he was walking on clouds to fly over Parliament House, so he was turning orange juice into diarrhea or whatever. It almost strikes me as if putting him to death in accordance with the Mark narrative brought shame on the existing king and queen. So they were like, well, get us out of this. We don't mistreat innocent people. So rewrite the story, rewrite the fucking story. So then they're ripping out of paganism, they're ripping out of miracle stories out of paganism, they're ripping the rising from the dead three days later out of paganism. So yeah, you want to look at statistics of the bisexual bisexual rights community taking a lot of pain and a lot of mistreatment. Well, maybe it does have something to do, dear Christians, with your garden of disgusting, can I vomit now, incest. Adam and Eve, no, there were other tribes in other places. Hey, but you just told me that God's created the earth and then one man, and then he got lonely, so he created one woman. So do you retract your claim that that the human race started out with one man and one woman? No, but there were tribes. There were other tribes around. Well, then where did those tribes come from? Adam's rib too? Or maybe he made Eve from his ribs and then he made the other tribes out of Adam's poo? Because it sounds like you, dear Christian, are talking shit while you're preaching right about now, and you should get your story straight. Now, not only, it means that they had to not only be inbred, but Adam and Eve's sons had to fuck Eve again, after Adam had already clearly done more than his duty to bring Cain and Abel into the world. Cain kills Abel, then Cain would have had to fuck to the point of impregnating his mother Eve, had a batch of, so this is multiple pregnancies, so there would have been multiple boys and girls, and that whole generation would have had to have fucked to the point of impregnation and childbearing every single one of their siblings and brothers, or the race would have died there in Eden. And the Christians want to tell you that don't call this horrific inbreeding, call it being created in the image of God. You know what? It spins me out so much that they think, what men like Rolf Harris get caught out, or Roger Tall yet to get caught out, and you all think it's simultaneously some sort of like, ooh, how did our society get to this point? It's like, check your retarded fucking religious stories. And check even what you mean by saying they're symbolic of other things and not to be taken literally, because you ain't got me lost there. We understood the symbolic teachings from the Little Red Hen. We understood that if you don't cooperate, then the team won't achieve as much. And we understood that all without believing that the Little Red Hen was someone we had to pray to every night on one knee. So the church have a lot to fucking answer for. And I think they're too busy trying to crawl up the monarchy's poop chute for hopefully for future royalties and honours and recognitions of various kinds, that they aren't prepared to ask critical hitting, challenging questions at this point. Uh, 8 minutes 32. So yeah, I love the irony that the Aborigines had more figured out before they were enslaved upon European invasion of being dumped here. Their snake in the garden, or snake's not even in a garden, it's their rainbow serpent. The rainbow serpent in the Aboriginal dream time does not give a fuck how many apples you or your woman should choose to eat. The rainbow serpent will smile on you and bless you if you don't fuck or impregnate your immediate sibling. The rainbow serpent in the and the Aboriginal Dreamtime already had this story that we are bound to the land, we owe to the earth, we owe our very existence to the mechanics of this earth. And they worked it out centuries before modern geneticists and Dawkins were pointing out, and Neil deGrasse Tyson was pointing out, that you study our genomes and we're all related to the very trees in our own yards. And I think the Aborigines are commendable and had better foresight than European Christians, certainly on a number of points. What I spent a long time thinking about is how the person who does your hair, cuts your hair, or the person who advises you or gives you tips on what clothes to buy, or what cosmetics to buy, or what album to buy, or what band t-shirt to buy, or what version of what band t-shirt to buy, or what philosophy book they think might be your sort of on par with your interests. These monists with a view to, we've worked out the meaning of life. I would listen to a woman who had gotten me involved in Uniting Church in my teens, and she had this conviction: we've uniquely, she implied, we at this Uniting Church have stumbled upon the truth about the meaning of life. And I just paused and watched her sound like she sounded crazy to me at that point. Like, you don't even have here in this church what I would consider to be an open forum for the discussion of ideas, and you have rampant proof of censorship of not even statements, but questions. And not even irrelevant questions, but questions that are a direct byproduct of the invitations of the leadership present in this same church ministry. So, how ridiculous do you want to make yourselves look? Like, you'd have to be proud of this whole Garden of Eden thing. Like, yeah, so what if God made us in our own image, fucking our brothers and sisters to the point of pregnation? And so what if we're calling that being made in the image of God? We're inbred and fucking proud. It's my, I'd like to see some apologist for Christianity. I'm starting to see it like the state of origin. State of Christianity versus the world. The proudly inbred versus the re-emerging bisexual rights movement of the 1960s. Who's gonna win? Inbreds versus bis, or bi open. Study hard. You know. Christians are ridiculous, thinking they've worked out what is necessary to save the world. They think they know as an academic matter what's necessary to save the world, but they're intimidated if your tone of voice should be a decibel behind their tone of voice when singing their previous hymn during a worship break at their previous church session. Now, I'm giving the Christians, in a sense, some props. I love what the Antichrist stands for, and I love the modern meaning of the Antichrist. But I'm giving Christianity some props because their willingness to engage challenging perspectives is more impressive than anything I've seen come from Freemasons. Not only do Freemasons seem to me to want to be secret, it seems to me that their secrecy is inclusive of being, amongst other things, an escape or a runaway, so that they can, but so that they can, once having run away from society, reassert themselves as something above it, as something knowing better than it, as something appointed by the supernatural deities and gods to enlighten and teach a better way to those who are stronger and more deserving of survival amongst it. Their sense of accountability is disgusting. I respect elders. I respect my elders. You're watching David Bowie in Black Star. It's a very emotional clip to me. And then you look at the face of Roger Tall in this riot act. Oh, Roger Tall, master of philanthropic giant. It's like, shit. Don't you know how even people on the street intuition works with an article like that? You might as well advertise, like, investigate me further, I'm corrupt as fuck. Flock into your woman's bookshop. You're a really gutless man. You have a pathetic sense of moral responsibility, and you have delved deeply into spheres of academia and been practical within practical science of those spheres that would require you to have earned honours and masters of various additional degrees to your pharmacy degrees. You seem to think it's equivocal, is it your Freemasonry that leads you to think that? I started Capital Chemist, but I'm a Freemason, so I can know more than a neuroscientist. Is that how your heads work? Because essentially, you started this ball rolling. You're going to be made accountable for this whole decade, and I'm not even looking forward to it, because it's not going to be a good thing for your franchise. But there are other chemists here that weren't putting up signage saying, everybody needs Northbourne Chemist. Like, everybody wants to suck Northbourne Chemist dick. You know, what if you had Capital Chemist say, oh, we know what matters? Well, you'd want to, the public would want to hope that in entering one of your pharmacies, you and your staff would be equipped with some relevant knowledge upon servicing members of the community. But okay, make that your slogan. We know what matters. My personal challenge is to Capital Chemist is, can you come up with a slogan that doesn't make me think of you fucking your mothers or any female relations within your family? I understand Roger came here from Tasmania. I understand there are stereotypes. It can be a difficult thing to beat, stereotypes. I understand that too. But, you know, it's bearing out in your slogans. Everybody needs their Capital Chemist. We know what matters. You're representing a degree of metaphysical universalism that I don't think any of you are equipped sociologically or philosophically to even deal with that level of responsibility. It's like you're trying to, it's like the sort of things that you asked me not to share with investigative third parties. You're at the same time drawing attention to the prospect of having those same things discussed, and it's just confusing to someone like me. But yeah, the two of them are a part of a wacky breed because, you know, as I said, and I've raised it before, can you think of a question where in the past, everyone household to household was saying, oh look, only science has the answer to this, only science has the answer. You've got a grazed knee, your knee's bleeding, we'll put a band-aid on it. Science has given us the answer. And then they suddenly turned and went, oh, a grazed knee? No, wait, we learnt from this psalm and hymn that if we bow and pray in this way, then God will stop the bleeding. There is not one example of a turning point concerning an issue or a question being answered where the answer was in the domain of science's achievements, but then it yielded and bowed to the evidently more impressive wisdom of theology. And you won't find an example of that. But how much has it been the other way around? It's been that way around concerning the size and shape of the earth, concerning what the brain is. History is, in terms of academic progress on almost all fronts, nothing if but a story of scientific academia constantly overturning the superficial statements of the religious right, and despite persecution, ultimately winning on all fronts. And that doesn't mean I'm saying worship science, because that's not what science is either. But religion has a lot to answer for on that domain, for certain. Where I think Gary and Roger Toll are sickos is that you often hear of religious criminals, you know, there's a pathology where a certain routine either had them underhanded or elevated them too much, overexcited them when they were young, so they had to, feel like they have to recreate it. And Roger Toll and Gary are very much like that. I've recently posted on Facebook, like, can you come forward and say, tell staff that have left your company what equipped you for, you know, this clockwork practice. How were you able to spot a psychopath given your experience in the Freemason Church? Why did you need no qualifications in neuroscience, neurology? Why did you need no qualifications in social science? Why did you need no qualifications in psychology or psychiatry, or any such matters, or even studies of other religions to have this insight sufficient that you are the ones to justly decide who warrants getting put into a psych ward by way of you hosting federal agency listen in on this bunch of phone calls while, you know, you or Gary impersonated them with voice clone software shortly before the meeting. This isn't. Our world is. Statistics aren't the reality. Statistics are a type of studying inquiry, and a citizen is inclined during their more comfortable moments not to want to indulge in thinking that certain things do go on. But that's the sad reality is, we've no reason to think that they couldn't. What if a man, and this is what I think, like, is this question is a heavy one for me, and is who is worse? Like the man that was on the news a few weeks back because he went on a shooting spree, shooting 3 women who he thought God would not have introduced them into his life for him to fuck and think about what he wanted to do with, or else those events wouldn't happen. But when he went on this triple shooting spree, he didn't murder them. He may have killed them, but he didn't murder them because of God's commandment and yada yada yada. But who is that guy a bigger threat to society, or is an even bigger threat to society a man with an entire corporate arsenal behind in his handshake, so that and all he has to become convinced of is that someone in the citizenry poses a threat to his interests, and suddenly an entire handshake chain of businesses that are friends with each other are all moving in on this one guy or girl, and for what? And who's more of a threat to society, and at the same time going to be completely able to avoid any form of accountability or proving accountability or owning up to their behavior in the public eye at the same time that they do all these things that they'll do. If you've ever played real-time strategy games, Warcraft or The Sims, Age of Empires, there are businessmen for whom us and our trips to the local shops and our trips to the local club and our chats with this or that friend, and we're viewed on a comparable level. These men praise as visionaries writers like Aldous Huxley, who wrote books like Brave New World, and talked about Big Brother. Big Brother gets made into a show by the mainstream media about, who's going to romance who in this house full of cameras. But really, Big Brother was about the world being too controlled, as progress enabled the powerful few to have too much power and control over the masses. And that's eventually what Big Brother was supposed to be about. Now, it seems to me like this conversation is not a foreign one, nor is it the first one to be raised, given the fact that that's what they decided they would call the Big Brother series. Let's not make it about how we're controlling or seeking ways to control society. Let's make it about who could kiss who in this room of this Big Brother house, and we'll put a pool in there and my particular interests, because I don't think that the drive nor desire to control people in some way that's an affront against their basic rights, it does not appeal to anyone but the religious. Like if a religious person can be excited about talking to a person that just got raped, like they won't say it to the person that just got raped when they're trying to counsel them. But they'll be excited, like, oh, I so would love to help talk to you through this difficult time. Why are they excited? Because they eat a rape murder every time they go through communion on a Sunday, and it's disgusting. You don't have to be an advocate or even an endorser of the bisexual rights movement just to notice that Christianity is that disgusting. It is. The crucifixion is offensive. So we have our way of acknowledging Christ, and it's not as disciples or followers. Um, from my point of view, that the man was scarcely given the chance to even live. Um, I'm from that generation, Rage Against the Machine. Be careful out in the workforce. Some of those that work forces are the same that burn crosses. It was never about like that wasn't that songs like that weren't about being a Satanist and wanting to set Jesus on fire with the devil. They were about we are against him being sacrificed, crucified, and we're against that. In turn, you might have a religious nutcase employer trying to sacrifice you and smear your family's reputation and integrity at the same time too, for a dollar or an investment. And now you do what they told you, and you're under control. Um, so these men, they're so pathetic at these Freemasons, as I said, they began in the 16th century. Their church doesn't seem to be acknowledging. They're opposing Christology, which is these New Testament manuscripts pertaining to Jesus Christ and his activities and involvements. But they're approaching them like a fundamental. They're approaching them almost like just like a fundamentalist Christian trying to sell you the idea that he really did walk on water. But except they're saying, oh, but look at all these teachings he was teaching in this same gospel. Like he deserved to get martyred for them because like look at those teachings. But from the same gospels in which you will find accounts of him walking on water. So what do you say to these Freemasons? Like, do you Freemasons actually stand to purport to say to me and claim to me this man actually did walk on water? Like a 200 years of critical scholarship pertaining to these four gospels, of complete avoidance and ignorance to your whole church, just because you want to win the battle of saying no, Jesus Christ was a martyr, not a savior, seems to be what they're obsessed about, and they're doing it they're going about it in a very much a way that it's like as if they still want to say, well, at least we have a common bond on being inbred from the same garden at the end of the day, right, peeps? Let's all hold hands in a circle. I think they're stupid. Gary Cans and Roger Tall, I must admit, I wish I'd never met any of them. They will rip at your education and the best parts of it. They are stupid drug salesmen, and their every religious cause is conveniently aligned with an objective to sell better, high rebate, profitable medicines that they can claim more money through their Health Insurance Commission monthly PBS claim submission. And that's essentially the gist of them. But they'll call it loving everyone. So then that leaves, well, what remains for us concerning the question of what is spiritual, what will help us make the just city, what's true spirituality about, and where are we going to find it if we're not finding it? If they're so equivocal, all these different theisms, these monotheisms, polytheisms, various gods, then even on the topic of Christ, you've got a scale of conservatives and men like Bart D. Ehrman, the professor who was teaching for much of his career that where he hasn't repented is on holding the grounds that a man named Jesus of Nazareth did exist, upon whom subsequent gospels were based and written about. But then you've got men like Richard Carrier, who are what you would call a mythicist. Mythicists will hold that essentially contained within the visions of the man credited to be Saint Paul in the New Testament documents that tend to appear after the Gospels. This man Saint Paul had these visions about this Jesus guy, and the Gospels were written off the writings about Saint Paul's visions, and no man named Jesus needed to have existed at all. So what's interesting is constantly going forward, and I encourage. I love the process of it. Like it is thoroughly enlightening. You go, well, these guys are mythicists. Who are they debating? Okay, they're debating and you find out all the people that they're debating. A gentleman named Bishop Spong is a very interesting bishop. He's the one bishop I've heard say things like, "Well, does Christianity actually deserve to end?" He's what you call a non-theist Christian, but that's playing. I think it's playing with words a bit. I think I'm wondering if bringing to awareness, because you've got you know, all of us have this. We're not surprised when Cardinal Pell or a man like him, a story is released about how, despite being a pillar to the community or having us all under the guise or convinced that such a man was such a pillar to the community, that instead he was a pedo all this time. And like, why is it that we're almost instinctively wired for the stereotypical priest to later be exposed as a pedophile? And I've tried to delve into working that question out, and that's what led me back to this Genesis stuff. Is that, well, what you get when you study the book of Genesis is that certain disgusting qualities about what must have had to have happened are overlooked for the sake of using other descriptors. Like, well, God made man in the image of God. Oh, woman caused man's downfall when she ate an apple. You know, there's not a single word about how that they had to fuck their own kids or the species would have died there in Eden. That's the bit that's not talked about. So I wonder if this Garden of Eden story instills. I wonder if it's sending an unhealthy message about human sexuality in the first place, because we know that things like cannibalism and incest are ways for species to extinct themselves and die out altogether. So, you know, that's what I think Genesis conveys, this twisted. It's like Hannibal Lecter will give you comedic relief from what the Garden of Eden Genesis story does in fact teach, which is that, yeah, a man was created. He was given command over the animals and the beasts. He got lonely, so his bitch hose slut horse skank was made from his rib. And so, you know, if you're a woman and you're invented from this man's rib, well, you be ready for dick sucking upon his every request. And, you know, there's that start to women's rights. Conversely, I think I bought Germaine Greer's Female Eunuch and was trying to read it. She was writing some very lovely. I was trying to compare her proudness about as was demonstrated by her literature of her pride in the vagina, and I was trying to compare it to whether, like, the question of whether pornography's sort of done that already. I understand completely why a woman would be inclined to fight back against the religious right, because I think that, and I love what Christopher Hitchens died saying about the empowerment of women having some crucial component to us finally in arriving at the construction of the just city, and we should all invest in it. But I was calling Germaine Greer to myself. I was kind of I'd nicknamed her Gur Man Gur, because like I don't know. In a way, I grew up largely in the company of girls more than guys, and it's like I talk about being anti-white with Aborigines here, and I talk about how when I see commercials about celebrate Australia's proud heritage, I just think, I say, when those commercials come on, I envision, you know, a few hundred Aborigines going, invasion. What you mean? You're advertising Invasion Day? You fucking blah blah. Settle down. It's probably a Rupert Murdoch network. You know, a lot of really odd intuitions grew out of me coming to terms with being mocked for my immediate family history, and that was the larger question of why should I be proud of this country's history at large. And that's a question I've been unable to answer at the same time too, in many respects. Why should history, especially, and you've got all these oxymoronic and contradictory statements being made. History is written by the winners. History repeats itself. You know, and then they want progress. They want rights to flourish. They want. They say they want all these things to benefit us, but then it's almost, it seems greedy now in a way. I can't begrudge people that thought we were on a flat earth, and if they walked off past certain cliff fronts, they would fall off the edge of the earth, because Copernicus had not sailed the seas and worked out we were living on a spheroid-shaped earth. I can't begrudge them and say, well, you ignorant fools, like but the fact that you can now look up on Google, there's a flat earth society around to this day, relying on web server relays that do go around the spheroid world just to host their fucking website. And they're trying to say that NASA is deceiving you and the earth is still flat. So, you know, I can't hate these ancients for thinking, well, we're going to rise up if we're good and we're going to sink lower if we're bad. I can't hate them for going through motions of wondering about that back then, but what I think is pathetic is to be given a global satellite network and still be going, you know. Maybe Jesus still hasn't left our galaxy yet. If he did ascend to heaven at the speed of light, I hope he truly packed enough oxygen, because though he's left the solar system, he's still within the Milky Way, so he could turn around, hopefully, if he was equipped with enough oxygen, and come back around to save all of those who committed and pledged our lives to the winning strand, denominational strand of the Judeo-Christian religion. You know. Keep killing your gods, keep killing your TVs, and love the art that you feel calls to you and that you call out for at the same time, because I can't tell you what that art will be, but I can tell you that art is the art's the power that I neither feel is over me nor that I am over, and yet is sustaining irrespective of what I'm going through. So I will leave that at that, and that'll be the end of this babble. Remember, you'll throw them off if you show this. Is it an Aussie thumbs up or a middle finger? Best not to tell them at this point. Make them think for themselves.